with coffee. It's
Evan. Oh, good evening.
and I think it's the 13th of August. That's for the audio. And welcome to today's guest. It's Bob Ward. Hi, Bob. How are you doing?
Good to see you. Thanks for having me today.
That's all right. How's it going? I mean, how's everything going over in, let's say, Texas?
Texas, yes. You know, we're our own country in Texas, pretty much in the United States. Things are going well, despite what people maybe see on the news in today's, learnings about COVID-19 and pandemics. One people don't realize about the state of Texas is it's about the size of 4 or 5 states of the United States. So it's a very broad state. Where I live here in a little town called North Richland Hills, Texas, which is near the Dallas-Fort Worth area, North Texas area, things are just fine. Obviously, like anywhere else in the world, we're affected by the current pandemic situation, but people are doing the best they can and trying to live as much of a normal life as possible while being safe and using all the normal precautions everybody else is. We do have mask mandates. People that are maybe have health issues are trying to do the right thing and make sure they're being taken care of. So overall, I think based on how things are going, in the current world events, things are going well for me. I know, and for my family, I'm very blessed.
So, in fact, you are the Bob Ward, and I got a little bit excited. Then I started a bit early, and I haven't done what we should do. So, I need to start with the clapperboard. So, syncing sound and vision. We have to do that.
Very, very professional. Very
yes,
professional.
Yeah. And everybody gets their name on the whiteboard.
Oh, that is special. Yeah, very, very slick. That is very high tech.
And you're very. When I was talking to Julie, one of her letters kept falling down. You can see.
Ward is a very British name. Ward is a very British name, right? I mean, it's a very UK. My family ancestry of Ward. I've got relatives in Michigan where this all comes from. Came from England to America before there was a revolution. This is back in the 1700s, and but my understanding that family name goes all the way back to the UK. So
this is Geeks on Screen with coffee, and you are
you're doing the proper coffee with all the pressing and everything.
Actually, I've always cheated and I've gone for instant, but because you are Bob Ward, I've gone for a proper cafetiere and
wow, I'm very impressed. I don't have any coffee with me. It's in Texas right now. It's very warm. I'd have to calculate centigrade. It's 102 degrees Fahrenheit right now in Texas.
So I don't know if it's the last couple of days. It's been very hot in the UK, but very hot in the UK might just be, 20. Well, I don't know, 80s or something.
Let's see here. Just to make sure we're all clear. Let's see, 104 Fahrenheit. Is what? Let's see, 40 degrees Celsius today.
Yeah. I mean that's pretty hot. Is that
well,
normal?
But that's normal. So in Texas, in being the South, if you look at the map, you can just see where we are. August is the hottest time of the month. In fact, if you ever want to travel here, I would not come during August. We traditionally have 40-degree days almost every day for several weeks at a time with no rain. It's a very hot, dry time of the year. I don't mind it. I'm used to it. I'm from here. I'm just used to that kind of weather. I'm not used to cold weather. So we can have very lovely days even in January and December, which is kind of the nice benefit of living here. But it's a very hot time of year this year.
So when you say lovely days, that is still quite warm though.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you said, what did you say? It was 23 there or something like that?
Yeah, 23, 24. Yeah.
So in December, we can get cold, obviously, in December, but it can be 20 degrees here in December here in Texas, 21. And sunny.
As cold as that.
I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, that's just gorgeous, stunning weather. So, but Texas is known in the United States for being one of the hottest states in the country, for sure.
So, I mean, thank you for agreeing to be on. And since you are,
happy to be here.
You are the Bob Ward, and I have to say, I am clearly not worthy. Everybody knows about you, even people in my team. Someone was actually, I
don't know about that.
was asking me a question. And I almost forgot. And it was, I think he wanted to know the biggest system you've worked on.
Oh, dear. Wow. Gosh. In support, I've worked in Microsoft support for 20 years before I joined engineering. and I worked on so many, at the time, large systems. Perhaps instead of telling you a story about the largest system I worked on, I'll tell you about the most impactful SQL problem I worked on. How about that?
Yeah, that's good.
Because I worked on a lot of large servers with customers of, 800 processors and terabytes of memory, and I mean I've just seen all of those on my whole career. But one of the most impactful problems I worked on was in SQL 7.0 timeframe back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Okay. And I got a call from one of the persons in the field about a problem with SQL Server showing incorrect results for a customer, and this person was in a very loud place, and I was like, I can't make you out. What customer is incorrect? He said NASDAQ. And I said, you mean like as in the stock exchange? And he's like, yeah, the ticker going on in downtown New York, right? The little ticker that says NASDAQ was incorrect, like off a slight bit. And because of a SQL problem. And I was like 7 o'clock at night. I was in Texas. I was up in the office at the time. And I was like, can you repeat that again? Now we discovered, as it turns out, it wasn't causing actual incorrect. I mean, that was to get the sticker shock, right? There was no laws committed or stock loss or anything like that. But it was a serious problem that somebody would say that maybe stock exchanges would be off because of SQL Server. So, 24 to 4 hours of straight work later, we did find a floating point exception problem that caused an issue for those folks. And it was very impactful. I think the other second story I would tell you that's really amazing, a lot of people may remember something in the early 2000s called Slammer. And I was in support in those days. I was one of our top support people in those days. I had direct connection to David Campbell and Paul Flester and Billy Joe Murray. The people ran the engineering team. And I remember I was on call for our support team in these days. And I got a call from my manager saying, hey, you need to come to the office immediately. There's a serious problem. I don't have time to explain. And she hung up. My manager hung up. So I went and took a shower. I got out of the shower. My wife said, your manager's called back and said, don't come into the office. All internet is down at the office. There's no reason to come in. In fact, my manager wanted to know, did I have internet connectivity? And I did at my house. But Microsoft, the whole network system was shut down across the company worldwide. So I found myself over the next 24 to 48 hours supporting the largest customers in the world from my house. Now, today, nobody would blink an eye at that. But 2003, supporting people from my house, people were like, what? So I'm literally giving direction and guidance to our top engineering leaders who are in a war room in Seattle with no connectivity. I'm telling them what MSNBC News is saying about this virus. It was crazy times. I'm pretty sure I worked so many consecutive hours. At one point, my boss just come and woke me at my desk and said, you have to go home. You've been sleeping. You just fell asleep for an hour. I was like 72 straight hours. I mean, just, hundreds of customers. But here's the cool story about Slammer. The cool story is the secure model you see today at Microsoft, the secure model you see of SQL Server, the least vulnerable product in the industry is because of Slammer. We took an initiative after that event. Ironically, that Slammer problem was a bug fix we'd already fixed. But it's a good example of people looking at an exploit and finding people that weren't patched and causing, disruption. But two amazing events in my career you might find interesting. So
there's one phrase that's associated with Bob Ward, and I've seen you at Past Summit, I think in a double session. It was a few years ago, and it's the one phrase that everybody looks for, and I'm sure probably cheer, is when they hear the phrase, "I'll just get the debugger out." Now, you're the only person I've ever seen to debug SQL code or show the debugger. I think we have this conversation with the mere mortals who don't get access to it. Is that it's not whether you understand everything Bob Ward says. It's not whether he loses you. It's how far you can keep up with him in the session before he loses you, because he is going to lose you.
I get that a lot. A funny story in some of those, and I don't do near as much. I'll talk in a second here. I don't do as much as those anymore. I really don't. That's not part of my job, quite frankly. But in those days, I did a lot of these because I was in support. I was a big internals guy. It was part of my job. I had to know the internals of the product inside and out. So the debugger was a big part of it. But the most common phrase I got in a lot of these, whether it was inside memory or inside latching or inside IO, I did those inside talks. People go like, Bob, that was one of the most amazing sessions I've ever seen. I didn't understand anything you said, but I loved it. And I would stand there with this blank stare going, thanks. Yeah, sure. The funny story is, I'll just tell you that back in the PASS Summit in the mid 2000s, the PASS board came to me. I've been speaking at PASS now for 3 or 4 or 5 years. They came to me we were at an event one night at PASS Summit. I can't even remember what year exactly it was. And they said, hey, we're looking to create some differentiation in our content. Nobody does a 500 level session at this conference. We don't even have such a thing. Would you create such content? And I'm like, well, what does that even mean? And Bill Graziano, about that time, was on the PASS boards. A personal friend of mine said, I want you to create a session that no one understands. Like no one in our audience, they will come in there and they'll go, what is this guy talking about? And so I'm like, do you really, really want that? And he's like, yeah. I said, well, I have to use the debugger. He said, perfect, use the debugger. So really, Bill, I credit him back in those days of creating that concept. So the next year I came up, I believe it was a memory talk. I can't remember what no, it wasn't memory. It was like latching or something. And I got up on the, on the screen and started doing bit twiddling and bringing the debugger up and showing assembly code. And people were like, what is happening here? My brain is melting. I remember distinctly in 2012, I know I had made it to the top of the PASS Summit speaking family because in 2012, I was speaking on Inside SQL OS. And they put me in a kind of fairly small room. It wasn't a really big room. And I don't pay attention to that stuff. I just show up and start speaking. But I looked down in the front row and all the MVPs had made this session. Every single MVP I knew was in the front row of the session. And I thought, dang, I better know what I'm talking about here. And the biggest compliment I got from all of them was, this was awesome because we didn't know this stuff. You did an amazing job explaining internals, using the debugger to show it off. Really, the debugger is just a way, obviously, to show off something you could show in a diagram or a visual or something. But in those days, I did use that extensively. In my job and support, I would probably use the debugger 4 or 5 times a day to crack a problem, to look at the source code, to debug how the source code works, something of that nature. But just to let you know, and to make you all feel better watching this, there are many people within Microsoft far smarter than I. I mean, I remember one time being in a session with Slava Oaks when I was in support, and Slava was patching the assembly on the fly to get around a bug he saw because we didn't have time to fix the code. So he patched the assembly on the fly to fix a bug on the fly so we could get around a problem so we could actually debug another problem. So yeah, there are plenty of people that are far smarter than me at the company.
So I was going to mention, obviously, that's quite a big thing. But then you became the SQL on Linux guy. And I think, is that one of your books in the background? I was just looking at your bookshelf.
Yeah, I don't know.
Have you got it up there?
But I have a couple of books that I've written over the last 2 years. One was Pro SQL Server on Linux.
Yeah.
The other was SQL Server 2019 Revealed. And I'm actually working on my 3rd book right now.
Oh.
So to be released soon. Anyways,
what's that folder?
The story goes.
Okay.
What's that?
I was going to ask about that folder. That looks intriguing.
Oh, you mean right here?
Yeah. What's that?
Folder. Okay, so this, for people that are younger, they're not going to recognize what a binder looks like, right? See this binder? A binder with actual printed pages in it.
Is it?
So the funny story here is that, let me see if I can kind of show something. Yeah, this is like the internals of data rows that are here. So the story is that I joined Microsoft in 1993. I was a Unix developer doing Oracle work, C++ programmer. That was my background. And Microsoft hired me because they wanted somebody who had a developer mindset, but wasn't going to do development. Like you be in support, you help us debug problems because you're a programmer, right? So this was the very first manual I was given back in 1993. I just cleared out my office in Texas because they're reconstructing the office. And I didn't remember I had this. This is called Sybase Server Internals. This is the original internal documentation for the product back in, get ready for this, SQL OS 2 1.1, which a lot of this internal still translates to today or even to SQL Server 4.2 and so forth. But so they handed me this manual. They said, look, we know this is really complex, but we kind of need you to study this over the next 6 months. Well, after 3 days, I learned this. I'm like, hey, this is no big deal. I mean, and I told one of the people working there, I said, where's the debugger so I can go see the source code that backs up this manual? And they said, what do you mean debugger? What are you talking about? And so that's where I started, I was a guy who did debugging in Unix all the time for code. I'm like, I want to see the data structures behind this so I can understand how to go break it down. So yeah, that's an interesting little token from 1993. And yes, there are still things called binders with stuff. But you asked about SQL on Linux. So again, I had that Unix background. Remember that, right? So when I joined the engineering team in 2016, I was working on SQL 16. I did a series called It Just Runs Faster. I was doing a lot of work, those kind of type things. I was working in the Tiger team. So I was still actually debugging customer problems and doing some of those things. But my boss came to me and said, look, we heard you were a Unix guy before you joined Microsoft. I'm like, yeah, I did that. And he goes, well, this SQL Linux thing is going to become a thing. We're releasing this in 2017. We hadn't announced that yet. But maybe you could pivot and start looking at SQL Server on Linux to start teaching Linux people and SQL Server people what Linux is about and what SQL is about. And so I started doing that. I started doing some presentations. I did a past summit talk and so forth. But that year, I had not written a book before. I had helped co-author a book in the past, but I'd never written a book. I'd only written like a chapter. So I thought, what better way to learn myself more and to showcase more SQL on Linux than writing a book? Because no one had done that at that point. In fact, when I finally landed with my publisher, A-Press, they said, hey, one of the things that appeals to us is that no one's written a book on this topic. And so off on this journey, I went to write a book on SQL Server on Linux, and it was really enjoyable because my philosophy is that when you present, when you train, when you write books, there's no better way to learn yourself than to do that, because you have to go research these things on how they work. And as you've seen anything that I present or write, I'm a big believer in being accurate and describing how things work. So, and I continue. I don't spend as much time on SQL Linux today. I still do it some, but for the next year or so, that's all I did.
So what are you working on now? If I can ask, if it's not too secret.
Absolutely. In fact, if you follow anything with me on social media, I'm not a social media giant, but if you've looked at it a little bit, I have actually been working in the last 7 months on Azure. So we released SQL 19 last November, and I'd spent, as you may have seen in the community, at least 18 months talking about SQL 19 and all aspects of it. And so in December, we were still in offices. Remember those days when we were still in an office, right? I was in Redmond campus having a meeting with my boss, Assad Khan. We were talking about the year, the release. We were all excited. It was just a great year for us with the announcement. And he turns to me and he says, like, what do you want to do now? And I said, well, I'll just continue to talk about SQL 19. And he goes, yeah, but is there anything different you want to do? And I said, well, what do you need me to do? Well, that's a mistake, by the way, to ask your manager what you need me to do. And Assad Khan is the chief group program manager. A lot of people don't know Assad, but he is chief program manager for Azure SQL, SQL Database, Managed Instance, Azure VM for SQL, and SQL Server. And so he said, look, I can really use your help on Azure SQL. I mean, it'd be interesting for you as a SQL Server person to go give me your thoughts about what you think about it. Now, I'd been in support for a long time, so I'd spent some time on SQL Azure back in those days. So I knew a little bit about it, but I had not focused a lot on it recently. Things like hyperscale and all that stuff, right? So my goal in December was to do an assessment starting in January of SQL Server. So I'd come in with that lens. I would compare that experience to Azure SQL. What was it like to install SQL and then install Azure SQL? What is it like to do performance, security, availability, all these things? So a colleague of mine, Anna Hoffman, spends a lot of time in this space, and she heard what I was doing. She's like, hey, can I leverage the work you're doing to build some training content on Azure SQL? And I said, of course. So we started meeting, and then the funny story goes is in early February, she said, this is really interesting. I don't suppose you'd be interested in helping me build this training content. And so thus began a journey that just landed in the wild. So right now, if you go out there on the internet and look for Azure SQL Fundamentals, for example, you will find a self-paced training course on Azure SQL that's perfect for a SQL Server person. Like, it tries to relate everything you know about SQL to Azure SQL. And here's the cool thing about it. You don't have an Azure subscription. Because it's using the Microsoft Learn platform, it comes with an Azure sandbox as you're going through the exercises. So it has content, exercises, all those things you need. Then, if you really want to get crazy, go look at Azure SQL for beginners. It's really not for beginners. It's for beginners who don't know Azure but know SQL. There are some 61 videos we've recorded over the summer here that are on YouTube right now, where you can go and learn in little 4 to 5 minute chunks about everything to know about Azure SQL. Next week, starting next Monday, we are doing a boot camp live on YouTube. We're doing something called the Azure Boot Camp Learn Live with the Learning Platform. And Ann and I will be taking that stuff I just told you and teaching a live workshop online for the next 4 days starting next week. So we have just spent a lot of time on Azure SQL. It's been a really fun experience for me because I've come in with this perspective of, hey, I'm a SQL Server person. How does this work in Azure? Is it better? Is it different? Is it the same? It's been a lot of fun, and that's what I've been doing the last 7 months.
So what have you found that has been the biggest difference then for you with your background?
Okay, so here's something that's not only a difference, but not a difference from you don't get this, just a difference from built-in capabilities. I meet a lot of people that try to go build HADR for their SQL Server deployments, right? Backup schemes, restore schemes, availability groups, failover clusters. I mean, you name it, right? That takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and rightfully so, right? The technology is all there, but how do you just put all that together? In Azure SQL, I hate to say this, but we just do it. If you deploy an Azure SQL database with something called business critical, let me give you this example. You go to the portal and say, I want a business critical database. You pick some options and you hit the button and say, I want one. Already, you get a built-in availability group with 3 replicas. You get backups on separate storage devices that are geo-redundant across regions. You get local database files already in SSD drives. I mean, you just get all this stuff, and then we manage all the failover logic. We have actual SLAs where we have a commitment to a customer to say, if we don't keep you available, you can get money back. I mean, it's insane. Even just the automated backup system alone is pretty amazing. So I personally believe that the built-in HADR capabilities of Azure SQL are something that's under not well known. And we try to highlight that a lot in our content to say, look, this is good stuff for you. You're going to come and pay us subscription money, but we're going to give you a lot of power and take away a lot of headaches from HADR that you have to deal with today.
All right. On a slightly different note, just
Sure.
change your kilter slightly. Bob,
Yeah, it's okay.
what's your favorite cheese? So it just seems so wrong.
Between Azure SQL and SQL Server to what's your favorite cheese?
Yeah, you know, it's
So this is an interesting show already. I can see. What is my favorite cheese? So do you know Munster cheese?
Munster or Monster?
Munster. It's Munster. Munster. Maybe it's a Texas thing, American thing. I don't know. But we have this cheese called Munster cheese in Texas, at least, and I love it. I put it on everything, and it's one of my favorite cheeses of all time.
All right, okay. I just thought I'd ask. You know, everyone gets asked that question, but it just felt such a really wrong thing to do at that time.
It lines up with the Azure SQL questions. All fits together.
Yeah. So there is a serious note that I wanted to address. And I used to be a SQL guy. I work in the SQL pools or Synapse space.
Right.
And so in the Azure space, so we got that together. You know, so we and then I saw 2019?
2019.
Big data clusters, and then I thought, are they coming to steal my job? Because it looks.
That's a great question, and you should go bug James Rowland Jones for that, right? You know, James Rowland Jones, he is now the chief program manager over that product, and I know you know James. So if you really want to give him a hard time, that would be a great question for JRJ. But I'll address it. So being as old as I am, I'm long-winded, so I get to tell these stories, right? And I talked about this in the SQL 19 book. It was a lot of fun because I talked about the history of this project, and that was at that time on premises, right? On premises. No one really had a great solution to integrate SQL Server with big data technologies in a very scalable, secure way. And so we thus born a project. We did this starting back in 2017, actually, called Project Eris. And Project Eris became what is known today in SQL 19 as big data clusters. A lot of fun wrangling for the name, by the way, over the period of a year with marketing. What should we call this thing, right? Travis Wright, who you may know, was a big part of that project as well. And today, Buck Whitty, my colleague, spends a lot of time training people and talking about big data clusters. Really, if you think about this, Synapse is an amazing product. And if I had to build any kind of analytics solution in the cloud, I would just go do that. I would just go to Synapse because I think it's amazing stuff, right? However, we have a lot of customers we've talked to that are not ready to make that move to the cloud. And they would like a single solution for analytics. But here's the other thing that they want, though. They want the power of SQL Server with that. Like, for example, wouldn't it be nice to have a SQL server where I could do OLTP work against the SQL server, but I could use a system that it's tied to do analytics with it? And what I mean by that is I would like to ingest HDFS data, data just like Parquet files into a file system. I would like to ingest IoT data. I would like to query sources like Oracle and Teradata and other things like that. But I want to use SQL as a hub. And so thus is this Polybase feature that, as you know, was in Parallel Data Warehouse in back in the day, and then landed in SQL 16 for Hadoop integration. Run SQL queries, go after Hadoop data. So we just kind of expanded that, right? We took the Polybase functionality in SQL 19. We added sources like built-in sources like Oracle, things of that nature. And then what we did is we just built a single solution that deploys all of that as one thing. You make one command line deployment script, and then we build a Kubernetes cluster that has all of this capability. So if you think about scale out analytics, if you think about having the power of SQL with this, if you think about a single secured solution, if you think about I don't have a Hadoop cluster, can you build one for me? That's the kind of stuff we ingest in this and infuse in this. So the capabilities that you see in Synapse, you see similar capabilities obviously in big data clusters, but this is a solution that is for on-premises customers today, where we would deploy Kubernetes in your environment. In fact, we just announced support for OpenShift, which is a big deal. So customers that want to use OpenShift environments in their data centers can deploy a big data cluster. And then, we're a SQL team, right? So this just comes with SQL Server. If you have a license for SQL, you just get this thing, which is pretty amazing, part of the story.
I mean, there's some features that you have in big data clusters. So the fact that Polybase will support all those different data sources,
right?
We just look at that and go, wait, that's coming. It's coming,
yeah, exactly.
But it isn't there yet. So you have this set of functionality that isn't there in Synapse. In SQL pools, some of it will then come across with the Synapse workspaces. So I'm differentiating that. The preview product where we can with the Spark integration. But the fact that it's an on-prem solution and our APS is kind of aging, I'm not sure what's happening with that. It feels like it's quite a natural thing to take over from APSs.
We actually had a customer just do this. We haven't announced this yet. We can't make it public. We had a customer just take their APS deployment and make plans to shift that into a big data cluster. So it is a natural fit, I think. In fact, we are pretty smart people. We're taking some of your technology. It's actually in big data clusters. Some of the scale out stuff from Polybase is using some of the MPP work from PDW in to do that scale up type query functionality. So, when we talked to customers about this, there were several things they said. They said, hey, I like that Polybase thing. That's pretty cool. I don't have Hadoop file system. We're like, fine, we'll just build one for you. And it's secure, right? So now we've got that all as one solution. And then they would say, well, I do have an HDFS file system somewhere. How do I tie this in? So we created this concept called HDFS tiering, where we just mount your HDF file system from Azure Data Lake or something into this, right? And then somebody said, I really like machine learning, and I see you've got machine learning services, but I'm a Spark person. We're like, no problem. We'll just integrate Spark as a complete solution into this with Spark endpoints. You can though use Spark ML, you can use SQL ML, whatever. And then we actually created, because this is Kubernetes, this concept called app deploy. So you can come in, you can ingest your data, you can run machine learning model training within the whole big data cluster infrastructure, which again can use different sources. You can then save your model as an application, and then it can be sitting atop of a REST endpoint. So then somebody as a web developer could just hit the machine learning model as an app now, and they don't even know that SQL's behind the scenes or Python's behind the scenes or Scala or Spark or anything. It's just perceived as an app. So, we've had several customers. Balzana was one that we featured a lot when we first announced SQL 19. They're kind of an AI company. They use it as a complete end-to-end machine learning system. They train their model, they do everything there, then they expose their model as a production application. And the other thing is secure. This is all based on Active Directory now, right? So a lot of customers we talked to that had Hadoop systems, they had disparate systems that wasn't very secure. This gives you kind of that built-in security. And again, there's still that master instance, the main SQL instance as part of this is just SQL Server. So you have all the OLTP capabilities if you want in the main SQL Server as part of the solution.
One of the things that I've seen is people want to move SQL Server to Azure, to Synapse. And something to put people off is we don't fully support all the T-SQL.
Right.
Because a lot of it wasn't put in, and it was just it was just enough. So there are a few things that aren't there. Lots of stuff is coming. I can't say what's coming, but there's
of course.
Well, there's lots of support for stuff that we've been missing is coming in. But just to say, well, actually, just run it, in Kubernetes. I mean, I was a big fan of SQL on Linux, and I did all the Kubernetes stuff.
Right.
Picking as much stuff up from you that I could.
Hey, Kubernetes is the thing, right? If you look at so big data clusters obviously relies on that as a technology to do scaling, automation, all those kind of things, right? Because that's what Kubernetes does.
Yeah.
But if you look at what we're doing down the road, we've already announced preview for Azure Arc. So Azure Arc is the ability on-prem to get kind of the feel of Azure and connect it to the cloud, either in a semi-connected or disconnected or highly connected way. And we have kind of two flavors of this we've announced. One is Azure Arc for Data Services, where it's a full Kubernetes solution in your data center. And we'll run it on Kubernetes, and we'll provide like a versionless SQL server and Postgres and MySQL. We'll do all that stuff. That's been announced, but it's all Kubernetes based. And then we have Azure Arc enabled SQL Server, which was what we're really doing there is just taking your existing SQL deployment on Windows or Linux. We'll install an agent in your environment that can be, again, connected or semi-connected. And then we will connect you now to the cloud. So if you've got this hybrid scenario where you've got some in Azure, some in your data center, but you want to kind of inventory or run services across this landscape, this is the kind of technology that's going to let you do that. So we've just announced these things, and I think you're going to see over the next year or so a lot of investment from us in this space. Okay,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Arc, by the way, that word arc, a lot of people are thinking like a curved arc. Arc is more like an electrical arc, trying to arc, electricity arc between 2 points.
Yeah.
So this is arcing, think about arcing Azure with you together, right? Kind of for this hybrid model. So.
Okay. That's okay. I guess that's something that we need to just be aware of, because when we talk to customers about their architecture, a lot of the time, it's like finding the best fit for them. And sometimes it's not moving everything up into Azure, it's actually staying on-prem. And there are some customers, that I've worked with that are never going on-prem. They're going their own data center. They may move a few things, but they're just going to stay local.
I mean, I've heard that comment from customers who eventually have moved to the cloud. But I also have heard that comment from customers that even in recent times, regardless of COVID pandemic, are still making investments in their data centers, right? But here's what they want. They're like, I love what you've done in the cloud from an automation point of view. So I would love SQL Server in my environment to get all of that. I want a versionless SQL Server. I don't have to patch it. I want automated HADR. I would like advanced threat protection. I would like all these things that you do as services in the cloud, but I want that in my data center. And so Azure Arc, that's really what that's all about.
Is that an extension, or is that part of a replacement for Azure Stack?
It's not a replacement. If you think about Azure Stack is a complete solution with hardware and software and everything else, right? So I think you're going to see Azure Arc run on that environment.
Okay.
But if Azure Stack is not a solution that you want, if you just have your own hardware already, think if you have your own hardware already, right? Yeah. This would be for you in that scenario as well. So I think it'd be a great complement to Azure Stack, but also be something that could run in your environment. If you've got you've got existing installations of hardware of SQL servers and you still want this, that's where that Azure and Arc enabled SQL Server can come into play. Or you've got a brand new deployment you want to make, or migrate your existing SQL to make more of an automated Kubernetes solution. This would be where you would do that as well.
Oh, cool.
So lots more coming out on that, as you can imagine. So.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my head is down in the Synapse and SQL pool space, and I I very rarely come back up for air to go back to the SQL engine that I know and love.
I mean, think about this. SQL Server, when I started with this book over here, ran on, Pentium computers.
I remember
with diskettes and 16 meg of memory, and there were single servers. Nobody had, connected servers or anything, right? It was all client server based. Today, and this isn't a marketing spiel, I'm just giving you the facts. Today, SQL Server, that core engine, runs on edge devices. It runs on like Raspberry Pis. Sorry. I run SQL Server on this right here. I can do that on this. So it runs in, you know what? It runs in your data center in SQL 19. It runs in containers, Linux, Kubernetes, Azure VM, managed instance, Azure database, Azure Arc. I mean, but here's the cool thing. I tell people get scared when I say all that. They're like, oh, I can't keep up with that. I'm like, do you know SQL Server? They're like, yeah, no, you're good. Yeah. Because the SQL engine for performance, availability, security, T-SQL, your tools, it all works across all of that stuff. What we do is we tailor SQL to the needs of wherever you're running it. So for Kubernetes, you know, we're going to want to make sure SQL snaps into the Kubernetes infrastructure. For Azure database, you know, people don't want to worry about instances anymore. I just want the database. You figure everything else out. But Azure VM, we're going to make sure SQL runs really well in Azure storage and networking and so forth. So we take that core engine and then we kind of tether it and we integrate it in with wherever we need to be. For IoT Edge, we've been able to reduce the footprint of SQL Server down to like 300 megabytes, which is insane, right? But you get almost everything today in the SQL engine in this. If you want a column store index, you get it. You want machine learning services, you got it, right? So yeah, it's for anybody listening and thinking that I'm a DBA for SQL Server and I'm SQL 2012 or something, and my skills are lost. That's not true. Just start learning some of the way SQL runs in new technologies. Your SQL skills are very relevant today because it's a great time to be in SQL, in my opinion. Well, I'm a raw guy, though, as you know.
I mean, I started on SQL 6.5. You know, so
I'm sorry.
It was. The user interface wasn't great, and there was challenges, but
it was still a great product.
Yeah. I mean, well, you knew it was a great product when we went to 7, and you went, well, it can run about 8. I remember we had an app, and you get 8 concurrent queries and connections and users running. It was, you know, exactly. And then when you went to 7, you know, it was going to 50, 75, and you went, wow, this is, and that was just due to, I think it was a locking. We actually introduced them rather than everything was page locking, or was it? I don't remember what. Yeah,
we did kind of a hack in SQL 6.5 for insert row level locking, something called that in 6.5, and then true row level locking came in 7.0. So
yeah, and so you could actually then scale up massively, and I think
exactly that was a big deal. Absolutely,
we couldn't compete with Oracle, and I think even so, the company I worked for. We actually had better insert performance off an ISAM of a file system.
Absolutely.
Than we did off SQL
7.0 was a monumental release. I was actually just talking to a younger colleague yesterday to her about the history of SQL. And she asked me about 7.0. She's like, tell me more about 7.0. I keep hearing about this. And I'm like, look, this was a monumental release for us because we really divorced a lot of the side-based code in that release. We rewrote the query optimizer. The storage engine was radically changed. We went to this latching model. David Campbell was one of the big architects of the storage engine in those days. So we made a lot of changes internally to SQL Server and really kind of removed a lot of the legacy code. And so it really, to me, giving my history in the product, it was really the 1.0 for what you see today.
And then would you say the next big change was then, I'm going to say 2000 and was it 5 where we had the DMVs?
Yeah, so SQL 2005 was the next major release for me personally and in the history of the product. This is when Slava Oaks introduced SQL OS. Yeah, it allowed us to expand how we ran and scheduled. I mean, we achieved record break benchmarks back then because of some of that infrastructure work. Ironically, myself and others in support were part of the people that worked together with Slava and others to introduce things like DMVs, eventually things like extended events that you saw and so forth. So I'm really proud of the tradition that we had in support. We used to really push the engineering team very hard on including a lot of diagnostics into the engine. And we're lucky to have people like Connor, Paul Randall, Slava Oaks, because all of those people agreed that we should put a lot of diagnostics into the engine so that you didn't have to use a debugger. I know that sounds funny, but Slava used to promote this thing with the team like, I'm going to challenge you to solve all bugs with no debugging. You can't use the debugger. That was the challenge. David Campbell also was part of that. Like, you have to first try to solve a problem without a debugger. And if you can't, you need to tell me what DMV we need so we don't use the debugger. Yeah. So that was really the impetus. A lot of DMVs were that. It was like, I want to run SQL queries to get diagnostics without having used debugging techniques. And so, yeah, that tradition still holds on. And the cool thing, what I've learned about Azure SQL, all that stuff's there. All the DMVs, all the extended events, anything you're just used to today, query store, lightweight query profiling, query plans, all that stuff all just works in the Azure space as well. So,
Yeah, and the DMVs are even coming through in SQL on demand. So
there you go. Exactly. Yeah, SQL on demand. I love that technology. I've just recently started studying that a little bit, so I think it's really cool technology.
Yeah. So I know we've got a hard finish. I've got 2 questions. I didn't prepare
of course,
you.
I've enjoyed being here.
I didn't prepare you for either of them. So one is
Here we go.
To nominate someone to have a chat. So effectively, to have this conversation with someone else. So think about that. And then the one before that this is a book of emergency questions that a comedian has done. There's 1,001 questions in here. You just pick a number between 1 and 1,001, and then you just get that question. And we don't do
I pick the number?
Yeah, we don't do the rude ones. Okay. That's all.
Okay. So my boys played sports in high school a lot, and they both wore number 17 in American high school football. So I'm going to pick 17. That's my question.
Okay. All right. Okay. What's the worst experience you ever had at a hotel?
Oh my gosh. I cannot remember the city. It was in the United States. No.
You can have more than one if you like.
Hotel. Wow. Okay, I'll give you the experience. It wasn't the hotel's fault though. I went to Seattle early in my career in the mid 90s, and I had been with my oldest son that was a baby, and he had gotten sick from stomach flu or something, right? And so I was with them for days and didn't even think about it. And I woke up in the middle of the night in the Bellevue Hyatt, which is much bigger now, at 2 a.m, just violently ill. I couldn't even get out. I couldn't even get to the door. So I literally was on the floor picking up the phone to the front desk saying, I need to go to the hospital. The hospital staff had to come up and carry me out of the hospital into the hotel, into a taxi. Fortunately, in Bellevue, Washington, there's a hospital across the highway. The hospital staff was amazing. The hotel manager that was on call rode with me in the cab, put me in the emergency room. They had to put IVs in my arms. And eventually I made my way back to the hotel. So it wasn't the hotel's fault, but I've been very fortunate for hotels. But I will tell you one other funny story for hotels, though. And this is part of this right here. In 2003 was my first trip to India. And I was in Bangalore, India. And normally you have little placards when you go to hotels that say, call this number for food service or room service. It's like a little placard. You can see this little placard here. I don't know if you guys can read this. It says, please don't feed the monkeys. And my first trip to India, I saw this, and the guy came in and was helping with my bags and stuff. And I said, is this for real? And he's like, yeah, don't leave that door open with the food in here because the monkeys will literally come in, and we have a problem where you feed them. And so I feel bad for the Oberoi Hotel, but I stole this because I'd never seen anything like that. So it's not a terrible experience, but a fun experience. So
no, I'm sure
I keep that as a
fine.
memento of my first trip to India in 2003. So.
And you didn't have any problems when you were in India? Because obviously
I loved India. It was great. I got to tell you, the people in India are some of the nicest people I've met in the entire world. I have been there. I think the last time I was there in 2016, but I've been there 4 or 5 times. And one thing I love about that conference they run down there, Amit Bansal and them run this, Data Platform Geeks Summit conference. It is some of the most passionate people I've ever seen. I remember 16 going there. And I'm a fairly humble person, man. Some of this notoriety stuff is foreign to me. So I'm there talking to Amit and some people. They said, "Hey, would you mind taking a photo?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't mind. It's kind of weird for me, but I'll take a photo." So I took a photo, and then somebody else says, "Would you take a photo?" I'm like, "Sure, taking a photo." I turn around. There's a line. I'm not kidding. Of 50 to 100 people lined up now for the photo opportunity. And you know what though? I couldn't say no. I stood there for 2 hours taking photos, and I didn't mind. Because every single person was just so honored that I would be there. They loved the content. They were so excited. The passion was there. So I've enjoyed my trips there. People are just very passionate, very nice in that country, and look forward to the chance to go back.
All right. I mean, that's a nice way to end it. So the last question. So who do you think would enjoy a chat? Doesn't have to be a Microsoft person. Could just be...
well, have you had Buck on before?
No, I haven't. And it's a bit of a running joke that everybody I speak to I'm too scared to speak to Buck. So I've done about 45.
It could be it could be your most entertaining hour. I mean,
it would be. Oh, I mean, I've talked to Buck before. I wouldn't be able to
say. How about Connor Cunningham?
Oh, do you think Connor would do it? He'd be game.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think he might. Connor could be one of the smartest people I know, and one of the most intelligent people I know, one of the nicest people I know. I do with Connor a lot. I talk to Connor all the time. We're both Texans. We're huge Cowboys fans together. You've probably seen us on stage at Past Summit before, wearing these jerseys and doing stuff together. Super smart guy, such a rich knowledge of our product. Think about a guy who's worked both in Azure and in SQL Server. Query processing was kind of where he all started, but you should just ask Connor, for example, hey Connor, how do you guys build Azure, and how do you guys maintain it in data centers and all that kind of? I mean, he really has that kind of knowledge, and I think you'd probably enjoy having him on here. He might do it.
So there is one story, and I think it was at SQL Bits. Must have been a couple of years ago. Were you presenting with Connor, or Connor?
I have presented with Connor before there,
and people were going, "What an amazing session!" And then apparently Connor hadn't seen the deck. The first time he had seen it when he was presenting.
It was absolutely hilarious. Connor, it was kind of a fill-in thing that we did together, right? We weren't even supposed to do this session at all. Connor said, "Let's just do it together." Just like the day before or something. Bob, let's just do this. I'm like, sure. So I scrambled and put some demos together. I hadn't even shown him the demos, and he hadn't even seen the deck at all. And so, about an hour before, and he goes like, "Should we look at this deck?" And I'm like, "Wait, you're running the deck, right?" He's like, No. You just do the whole thing. I'll just talk." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So I'm a big preparation guy. I like to prepare very carefully for these sessions. So I was really nervous because I thought we'd have a big crowd. He's so knowledgeable. He's so good on the fly about saying anything about anything that he made me feel at ease. And it was very easy to go through the topic because he knew it backwards and forwards. He had worked extensively in this feature. And it was a lot of fun we had a lot of fun together because I always try to throw a demo wrinkle at him that I hadn't told him. Like nowadays I do that sometimes. I'll just do something he doesn't know. And I just get this Connor look like, what the heck are you doing? So yeah, I think I did one on that session. I did something in Azure that he didn't know I was going to do. I said, "Guess what? I did this in Azure." And he's just like, "Thanks for letting me know." So yeah, very knowledgeable person. Great person to have on. He lives in Austin, Texas. He lives about 3 hours south of me. And I think he'd be a wonderful guest for you.
All right, great. Well, it's on the hour now, so thank you very much, Bob. And
enjoyed being here.
We'll say goodbye to everyone. Some messages were coming in on Twitter. I know the guys from 8KB said something, but I haven't been checking.
Oh, the 8KB guys.
Yeah, I haven't been checking any of the social media stuff because I've just been focusing on you. But
well, that's so nice of you. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on here. I love this product. I love our community. I just want to tell everybody, if we didn't have a community, we would have nothing. We wouldn't have a product. So thanks for everybody to continue to support what we do. And we just try to do the best we can to give you the information you need and to build the best products and services we can for SQL.
Did you want to just tell people you're going to be at SQL Bits presenting virtually? Aren't you doing one?
I will be presenting at SQL Bits virtually. Yes, I will be doing pretty much the same stuff that I'd signed up originally to do, including a pre-con on Azure SQL and on SQL 19. So yes, SQL Bits, one of my favorite events of all time. I should have told you that UK is perhaps the most favorite country I visit in the world.
You say that about every country. I mean, you said that about India.
I really do. You ask anybody who's a friend of mine, you ask my wife, London, UK, I love this country. I love coming to that country. I'm so sad that I cannot be there physically this year, but I'm very much looking forward to presenting virtually for the SQL Bits audience.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, and it's been wonderful. We'll just say bye to everyone.